I know who did that. I literally stopped somebody talking. I was like, I know who did that commercial. I know who did that commercial. Well done. All right. Bonjour, y'all. How y'all doing over there in the corner? Y'all all right? All right. Well, we are on official Southern time, which means we're a few minutes late according to the Northeasterners, but right on time according to the Southerners. So thank y'all for joining us. My name is Colette Pichon Battle. I am the chair of the Equity Advisory Group that was a part of the Climate Initiatives Task Force under our Governor, John Bel Edwards. And it is my honor to welcome y'all into this wonderful community session. Look at everyone. We're in real life. We can touch and see each other. Don't forget to wash your hands later. It's okay, we'll talk about it. Just want to say thank you to everyone. Please, a few announcements, just so you're aware. We are recording this. Not everybody could make it today. So we are recording. Your faces are not being recorded, but your voices are, and the slides are being recorded. So folks have access to what we talk about today. So just keep that in mind. That's what we've got going on. We've also got some materials in front of you, some pens, some sticky notes, some things like that on the table. This is all going to be used in some exercises today. There's some printed materials that I believe were at the front door. Hopefully you picked those up as you were able to go. And I don't know what to say about name tags, except I don't see any. So be Southern and introduce yourself and just say your name before you start talking. It's all right. We remember how to do this community thing. It's totally fine. It's totally easy. This is an official meeting. So let me start us off by calling us to order. And I'll do just a roll call of the advisory group members. And I think someone's taking note of this. Lindsay might be. Okay, great. Okay, Colette, I'm here. Charles Allen, Jasmine Brown, Steve Cochran, Dr. Kenny Cole, Dr. Craig Colton, a little late, Chief Cheryl Parfait Dardar, Ashley Gardier, Dr. David Robinson Morris, Ashay, Liz Williams Russell, Larry Saraparu, Rodney Wallace. Okay, we know a few folks are going to be late. We'll just take note that we took roll, and if folks check in, we'll add it into the record. We've got a little bit of business to do, and so I'm gonna. Oh, can we even approve our minutes? No. Yeah. We can continue. Just okay. So we were going to approve minutes from our last meeting, which was in September of last year, but we'll wait till we get a quorum, and we'll keep y'all all abreast of that when we actually approve those minutes. But let's just take a minute to have some of our members introduce themselves, just so the community folks know which advisory group members are in the space. Steve, don't mean to put you on the spot here, but you're up first, my friend, and you were on time. So do you want to just say your name, your organization, any parishes you work in, and fun question for you, the best part of the fall in Louisiana for you? That's right.
Steve Cochran is my name. I work for the Environmental Defense Fund. So I've been for almost 26 years now. And around the country, and actually around the world. Louisiana's home. I managed to trick the effort to get me back home again. So One of the best things about fall is it's not quite seasonal as it is in parts of the
Mhm.
country. So I'm not worried about shoveling snow.
That counts, that we don't have to shovel. Let's remember that as we save this great state of ours, that we don't have to shovel snow. Amen. Thank you. And thank you for your service. Thanks for being here. Let's go to Dr. David Robinson Morris.
David Robinson Morris, formerly of Xavier, a unique professor and the founding director of the Center for Human Spirit. Currently consulting, as most people do after hiring. Happy to be here.
Thank you. Your favorite thing about the fall in Louisiana?
My favorite thing about the fall. What was my favorite thing about the fall? But Thanksgiving?
Yes.
Yeah.
I felt like that was really obvious, but yes, I am like, yes. Do y'all not know gumbo in November? Yes. Thank you for that. Liz Williams Russell.
Yeah, hey, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Liz Russell. I am the state director for environmental incentive funds for the last 7 months or so. But previously was at the Foundation for Louisiana Climate Justice work for the last 6 years. So most of my time in the advisory committee was in that role, but excited to be here in my new role. I'm from New Orleans and my family is all across the city and the region, and I'm glad to be the celebrating the chief of our state. My favorite thing about the fall is more time looking outside and sweating.
I love it. Sweating less while cooking outside. I say yes, let us enjoy. And did I get all of the advisory group members that are here so far? All right, we'll welcome folks in as they come. And just to give y'all a little bit of a hello, we are here to work. Thank y'all for showing up to do a little work. The Equity Advisory Group was responsible for really advancing the issue of equity in the Climate Initiatives Task Force that the governor really put forward. And so we're really excited to see that some of the work that we did through that process is now at an implementation phase. And so what we're doing right now is really asking folks to give input. This is supposed to be a transparent process using democratic methods. That means we need everybody participating with what you got. It doesn't mean that everything you say is what's going to happen, but it does mean that everything that gets said and put in here is going to be considered. And so we're working with some really great folks that you're going to hear from that are going to really listen to us today, really take what we give, and then try to make that into something that we can use going forward. And so I just want to say, the intention of today is not to perfect or finish anything. So manage your expectations. We are cultivating, we are not finishing, we're not concluding, we're starting, and there's going to be more. We hope to have another gathering of this group in January or February so that we see what we've cultivated today in a more a draft form before it is submitted. And there's also going to be a way for folks who are not here today to, and even those of you who are here today, to offer online input if you think of something that might skip you while we're in this meeting. So this is a low stakes meeting. This is where we need everybody in, and normally we have public comment. And so this is a space where we will be doing public comment throughout our time. Of course, I will call to see if there's anything else that we need to put on the record, but our hope is that all of your comments are going to happen through the processes that we do, as opposed to just making 30 minutes of public comment at the end. Okay, everybody okay? If you're all right, say I'm all right. All right. Well, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lindsay to give us a little grounding in where we've been and where we're going.
Thanks, Colette. So for many of you, it's wonderful to see you for the first time in person. Our Equity Advisory Group is our first of our climate groups to meet in person. So it's great to see you guys today. And thank you for coming to New Orleans for this meeting. I want to just provide an overview of what we've been up to since we met last. If you remember, we had a meeting the evening of September 31st after Hurricane Ida, and we were able to share stories about climate resilience and a lot of the challenges that communities were facing in the wake of the disaster. So now's our time to come back together and put so much of the thought and effort that we put in the development of the climate plan into implementation. But before we make that jump, I want to overview for you what we've been up to in the meantime since we saw you last. So I'll do a quick overview of the climate plan just to bring you up to speed. As many of you know, the governor set forth emission reduction goals. This really launched our governor's climate task force, and the equity advisory group is one of our subgroups underneath the task force. So it had 10 groups that were reporting to the task force to really help advise on developing a climate plan. So we had a lot of people engaged in this effort, all leading us to develop a climate action plan that would help us meet these goals of net zero by 2050. So we are all pretty familiar with this graphic, but just as a reminder, Louisiana's emission profile is very different from other states. So we had a very unique challenge, and even in the equity advisory group, we had very different conversations than you might have in other states that are focused more on transit and the built environment. We were focused more on the industrial emissions, as well as lowering barriers to the transition of transportation, clean buildings, clean cars, and clean power as well. So with that context in mind, through the process of developing our action plan, we did want this to be a very data-led process. So we worked with some partners in the modeling space to help us build what we're calling our net zero pathway. So this pathway is guiding us through data and science of understanding our unique emissions. How do we reach our goal of net zero by 2050? And it may look easy, like there are only 10 things you need to do, but this is a very high level graphic. So there are hundreds and dozens of actions that go within this graphic that helped us set this policy path forward. So we did spend about 8 months iterating on this, the pathway itself. So though we wanted this process to be founded in data, we also wanted it to be malleable to what our stakeholders saw was either well-suited or not well-suited for Louisiana. And this leads us to 3 big climate policy pillars. And so as we're thinking through climate equity indicators, we want to think in terms of what are the most significant areas in Louisiana where we're looking to reduce emissions. So the 3 policy pillars we have is generating renewable energy, and then timing that with electrification of our industrial sector emissions, because remember that was like our biggest subset of emissions, and then switching our fuel sources from what they are now, which is oil and gas. We want to switch that to hydrogen for some of our heavy industrial processes. So with all of that in mind, our climate plan actually addresses all of our emission sectors, though we do focus a lot on that industry side, because as you saw in the graphic, our emission profile is very heavy on industry, so our solutions also need to be prioritizing industry. But our climate plan is actually across all of our different sectors, even those that only contribute like 1% to emissions, such as the agriculture sector. But in this plan, it's about 200 pages long. You're welcome to read all of it. We have a nice 4-page summary that's actually a little bit easier to understand. But this puts forward 84 specific actions to address climate change. So by that, I mean specific policies, regulations, legislation, all those elements and the details that we need to reduce emissions. And so those sectors, the sections of the plan are listed here. It's around clean energy, industry, methane, transportation, the built environment, our natural lands. And then we have 3 sections that are helping us bring all of this together. So that's around building collaboration and partnerships to be successful, a low carbon economy, and then accountability and adaptability over time. And in terms of how we're tracking our implementation of climate through the action plan, in each of those 84 actions, we set forward a little mini implementation table. So this is setting forth who are the partners to implement this action, what's our near-term action, and then what are our goals in terms of achieving this action. So it's a very high-level summary of those details that we have. So that's the climate plan at a very high level. I encourage you to learn more. We have a lot of great links and resources. We passed that unanimously through the task force, of which Colette is a member and Harry's our chair of the task force. We passed that through unanimous consent of the task force with a lot of opportunities for noting dissent throughout. So what has the state been up to since? Now we're about 7 months post the action plan. This is such a great example of what we're trying to achieve in implementation, of serving as a convener, a collaborator, a hub of innovation, design, demonstrations, but also a partner that we're all in this together. And in order to meet the incredible goals we have set forward and how challenging that is, we all need to be partnering with one another. I want to bring us back to a component we spent a lot of time early in the climate process developing, and those were our fundamental objectives. Some of you might still have some nightmares from this. This was like a 3-month process of developing out all the objectives we wanted to prioritize in the climate plan. And there was a lot of give and take on setting these objectives, but we landed on 7 categories here that really express it not only matters to us that we reduce emission, but it matters how we reduce emissions as well. So the one we're going to focus on today is on creating a more equitable society. We have 3 objectives that we landed on under this section, and that's what the Equity Metrics Project is based on. So I'm bringing us back to something that really was foundational in developing the climate plan, and we want this to be foundational in how we implement the plan as well. So this first objective is around reducing socioeconomic, demographic, and geographic disparities in future opportunities and outcomes. So this is reducing disparities as we move forward. And the bullets listed below are ways that we envision this could be materialized, ways that we see we could reduce disparities and move into the future. Another objective that we set was maximizing reduction and mitigation of historical and structural inequities. So this is our objective on looking backwards. So we balance the first one of looking forward, this one of looking backward. And then our last one is on maximizing engagement with and participation of communities in decision-making and implementation. So in these objectives, I know our advisory group wrestled a lot on what these objectives would be, but where we landed was one that is looking backwards, one looking forward, and then one more broadly on engagement and participation. And we have quite the mouthful of a definition from the advisory group as well. This is one also that we worked on for a couple months. The definition that ended up in our climate plan, and again, the foundation of what we're basing this effort on, is how we define climate equity. So that's a people-centered approach to addressing the global climate crisis through action that seeks to address long-term equality of outcomes by acknowledging institutionalized harms to historically marginalized people and communities, and by holding accountable those who benefit from the root cause of climate change that disproportionately impacts the most vulnerable. So it's a mouthful of a definition, but comprehensive of a lot of the challenges we talk through in this space. And just to note how comprehensive this is, let's take a look at the definition. The federal definition of equity is much broader. So it's around consistent, systemic, fair, just, and impartial treatment of all individuals. And we, through our definition, our lens of climate, go into a lot more detail. So today, again, just to show this one more time, this is what we'll be diving into through the Equity Metrics Project. And I just have one slide that really frames up what I've spoken to. Again, taking these 3 metrics on the three objectives that we work through in our process, and then we want to turn this into something that can help us track implementation. So we want to track implementation of the climate action plan in terms of how it impacts the equity objectives that we set forward in our climate plan. So our approach here, and what Robbie is just about to speak to, is that the goal of our project, more generally, and especially our time here today, is on developing a strategy for shared and evidence-based baseline that can help us measure climate equity challenges and track implementation over time and sustain action and accountability more comprehensively than we see in like one data or one tool. There's so many equity tools that we see out there right now. We want one that can address all that we just spoke to in the climate action plan and our definition of climate equity. And with that, I'll hand over to Robbie.
While we're switching the slides, thank you everybody for coming. Thanks Lindsay for the introduction, and thanks Colette for kicking us off. I'm Robbie Havens. I'm the economist with the Data Center. We're a small independent nonprofit research organization and data intermediary with a mission to democratize data. I want to give a shout out to my colleagues, Jenna Losh and Haley Tomlin in the back of the room. They've been really helpful and they're going to help with the discussion. So my job is to kind of set up some of the conversation about climate equity indicators. That's a little bit of a mouthful in itself. And kind of transition us into the discussion, which is where we want to spend most of our time today. In the interest of time, I am probably going to go a little bit fast through some of the material, but I think you guys will get the idea. I also want to point out that on the tables that you might see a copy of the New Orleans Prosperity Index. And we brought this, it's a racial equity indicator report that my organization did in 2018 that focused on racial inequity in the city of New Orleans. And there's a lot of great indicators in there. We just brought it to give some example of the kind of field where we're working in. Although the difference obviously is that we're talking about the state of Louisiana here, and we're talking about climate equity. Okay. Sorry, a little delay. So I think Lindsay went over some of this stuff. We're in phase 1 of this project, which focuses on developing an evidence-based strategy. We are holding the first stakeholder meeting now. We're aiming for January for the second stakeholder meeting and shooting for a final report in February 2023. What that final report is going to contain in a nutshell is going to be a selection of indicators, which is a process that has not been determined. We're just getting underway with it. And then recommending a set of equity data resources. So how should these indicators that we've selected be used and tracked over time? And it might in fact be more than one resource. So this is a little bit of some of the lessons that we've learned at the data center, a little Venn diagram for you. So there is a part of this, we're talking about data, it's very technical. That's why we're the technical team. This is our main role in the project. But at the data center, we found that these kinds of projects are most impactful when they're tied to a story and have a good, compelling research question. And when the resources that we provide are usable to a variety of audiences, hopefully, and sometimes to very specific audiences. And since we're early in this process, we do want to spend most of our time today on the narrative piece and the usability piece. And that's going to be the kind of focus of our conversation. So again, today, our objective is not to present some well-defined set of indicators that 80% finished project. We're really coming at the ground here. We want to use this as an opportunity to shape the stories that we can tell with the data and the way that we tell them so that they can be impactful. This then will be used to guide the decisions and the technical and design decisions that we make. And then when we come back, hopefully in January with the second meeting, we'll have a more complete set of recommendations that we can have more concrete feedback. Our discussions today are more generative, but ultimately, this is all part of a process and it's intended to lead to high quality, high impact data that can, just like Lindsay described for us, help to reinforce the equity objectives of the Climate Action Plan. So you might have heard me use the term story a couple of times. Here's a little bit of just a demonstration. This is not the story. This is only a story. It may not even be a great story. It's really just to get the wheels turning for our discussion. So we already covered the unique aspect of Louisiana as having a large share of our emissions from industrial sources. And we also know where those industrial sources are. So these are the top 10 emitting industrial sites in the state of, I'm sorry, the top 20% of emitting industrial sites in Louisiana. And these top 20% of sites account for about 84% of industrial emissions. So a very large part of that chart that we saw previously. And while I'm not gonna focus on health right now, we'll have plenty of time to discuss health outcomes and exposure to environmental hazards. I think we'll all be familiar with the potential relationships that could exist between this map and those outcomes. But I'm going to focus a little bit more on racial disparities. We know that in our state, racial disparities persist across virtually any measure of socioeconomic status, as well as any factor that predicts economic opportunities over the life course, such as access to high quality education, neighborhood amenities, and good paying jobs. We also, I'm sure we'll all be familiar with what's happened with housing costs over the last couple decades, that Housing cost burden is a major issue, and I'm sure we won't be surprised to know that people of color experience excessive housing costs. But just as we're talking about an energy transition that can have consequences for energy costs, we can also see that energy cost burden, which is defined as paying more than 6% of your annual income on energy costs, is also disproportionate. If we talk about this in terms of an economic transition for our state, and we look at previous periods of economic transition, we see that barriers to full participation in the labor market are persistent and pervasive. One of the indicators that had the most carry in that prosperity index report was that in the city of New Orleans, just a little over 50% of working age Black men were employed. And that number is only a few percentage points better at the state level. So I think that there's a lot of ground to make on achieving more inclusivity in the economy. But maybe the silver lining in all of this is that there are a new set of jobs that are going to be created with the technological and economic transitions that are going to make. And sometimes when we talk about quote unquote green jobs, we mean these new and emerging occupations that might not even exist yet. But we could also talk about green jobs as existing jobs that will require enhanced skill sets to do them. That might be some sort of monitoring technician who has an additional requirement to monitor greenhouse gases. But we could also talk about jobs that are largely the same jobs as they exist now. They will just see increased demand. My favorite example there is a bus driver, because if we're all going to be taking transit more often, there will be increased demand for bus drivers, even though that's not necessarily what we think about when we think about green jobs. When we look at wages in these industries, they do tend to pay a little bit better than jobs in the workforce as a whole. And that's an important thing because our economy has not done a really great job of creating accessible, good paying, middle earning jobs over the last couple of decades. So this could maybe fill some of that gap. In order to make that work, I think that there's ground to gain on inclusivity within these sectors, because a lot of these jobs do skew male and skew a little bit white. So there's a bit of a transition there that's of course attached to the term just transition that we hear about sometimes. So all that to say, what do we mean when we say climate equity indicators? And I think Lindsay covered some of this, but it could cover a range of health, socioeconomic, and environmental topics. I mean, one of the challenges with all of these projects is that climate is itself such a broad issue that it touches nearly everything in society, and it almost makes you forced to make priorities. Equity indicators means you can disaggregate it by race, gender, income, or place, or other dimensions of inequality. We want to be able to track them over time. You know, some data sources are really good for that, some not so good. But ultimately, all of these indicators can be used to inform policy processes to demonstrate the effectiveness of climate actions and to highlight areas where more actions is needed. Equity indicators are always conscious of reflecting past and present drivers of systemic inequality, but we also want them to be able to capture progress on a more inclusive prosperity as we go to the future. So that's usually the kind of priority process that we take when we approach these projects. That could still mean a lot of broad things. So this is just a bit of hierarchy. I know there's a lot on here, but the way that we're approaching this, a little later in the evening or in the afternoon, you'll see this reflected on the wall a little bit, but we're interested in overarching narratives and ways that we can group together different themes of indicators and then topics within those themes. And this is just an example with well-being and prosperity. We could talk about income inequality as a topic, and then maybe median household income is our indicator under that. So we're not going to get into the super details on all that stuff, but that's where we're ultimately heading with selecting the indicators for this project. So what are we doing today? We're going to have two kind of semi-structured exercises for you guys. One is going to focus on audiences and users for this data, because it is really important to talk specifically about who's going to be using it, how are they going to be using it, what are the needs of those audiences, how can they further the equity objectives of the CAP. And then after that, we're going to spend a little bit of time brainstorming some indicator topics, and most importantly, again, stories that we can attach to those indicator topics. And all of this is ultimately helpful to make the kind of decisions that we need to make to build an impactful product. I think Colette mentioned that there will be a follow-up survey. So if you forget to mention anything, that'll be going out, and hopefully we can capture a few more people with that too. Okay, last bit of transition. This is an example of what we mean when we mean audiences and use cases. You guys might have seen these screening tools as different agencies in the federal government and a lot of states and local governments are kind of tackling similar problems that we're trying to address here. A lot of them have come up with these screening tools, and here's two, one from the EPA, Environmental Justice Screen, and one called the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool. And what these do is take a huge amount of indicators and boil them down in order to prioritize communities. That's a very specific use case. Usually it's in response to a directive from government to prioritize communities. This is something we might end up recommending. We might also end up recommending a broader set of tools that would accomplish different tasks, perhaps for different audiences. So this will be our transition into the first discussion. First, I'm going to open it up to the floor a little bit. But in our preliminary discussions, we've identified 4 very broad audiences. And here they are: state policymakers, leadership and regulatory bodies, community advocates, NGOs and faith leaders, government agencies that are involved in the implementation process, could be state or local, and decision makers in key sectors that have been identified by the Climate Action Plan, including, importantly, private industry. I know those are all broad categories, but this is a time when we want to think about who the audience is that we want to build tools for. So I'll ask anybody to raise their hand if they think that an important audience is missing from this list, and we can add that. Please, sir. That's a good one. Please.
I mean, our parish, I don't know if parish governments and parish government workers are on that slide or not, but certainly there's so much action at the parish level and all of these things. Parish councils and parish boards.
Okay, I think that could probably fit within the third group.
I'd add the scientific and academic community.
Okay, yeah.
Anyone think about putting information technology and data acquisition companies on the front?
Okay, is there any others? Oh, wow. Please.
Oh, industrial workers, they got out.
Saw some other hands up, yeah.
Wanted to, for journalists and average citizens.
Mhm.
Voices outside of the state. I think that's particularly important since so many of Louisiana's emissions are industrial emissions that are emitted by people outside of the state.
All right, this is a lot of great suggestions. We've already built it up quite a bit. So I think we'll take that into the first activity. And now that we've got a few more suggestions, I think maybe I'm gonna on the fly try to collapse these a little bit into groups, and that can be how we organize our discussions. So we mentioned small business owners, industry workers, fishing and farming communities. I think we can put that with private industry and sectors, because those are specific sectors that are going to be responsible for this. I'd suggest that we put academics and voices outside of the state with community-based organizations, and just think a little bit more critically about what that group includes, at least for now, but we can talk about that in the discussion. And then I'd say for government, government would be included in the first and third categories here. So, so let's take that is that we're going to spend this as our first breakout group. So we've got a lot of ideas and we can kind of flesh out what to do with them. So the idea here is that these are just a few leading discussions and we'll have facilitators for each of the groups. We have 4 facilitators, so we are going to keep it to 4 groups. But why don't we go ahead and, did we pick parts of the room that we thought would be, have we assigned that yet?
I'll be government's.
Okay. Okay. So I'll be the NGOs and I'll come over here.
Decision makers in key sectors.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I'll be government policy.
Okay, that sounds good. So we're gonna break up and give you all a couple minutes to kind of move around and resituate yourself. I'm gonna come back here. Thank you.
Yes, decision maker policy.
We can push that one, which is cool.
Yeah.
I think we did want to spend just a couple of minutes reporting back on what was hopefully a slightly too brief, but productive discussion about a huge audience group. So ours was the NGO, nonprofit, and faith leader group, which is, as was discussed, very large and probably should have included some other groups. One thing that came up for us was the importance of qualitative data and conversation with quantitative indicators, and in some cases, nonprofits are useful arbiters of that. We came up with a few good examples: advocating for quality of life, dispelling harmful narratives about job creation and sort of fear of a just transition, and the other one was access to quality of life. Anyway, I think we also identified a role for academic communities and maybe having a data resource that could be maybe a common bridge or a common language between the nonprofit sector communities and academics who have the sort of to analyze data in ways that just all need to be in the same data. So that was a little bit of what we talked about. Generally,
Yeah, sure. Okay, so this is the government agency. So we talked about how like control is smaller government are where they're creating plans or implementing plans or allocating people who do zoning, people who do property appraisals, building permits, and allocating funding to education. This huge range of players, all concerned. As far as tools, some of the reactions to the screening tools are how data at smaller levels. Very well.
Elise?
Policy, we took it from a federal policy perspective. We mostly discussed federal and state standards around reporting requirements and how that can help move federal and state policy forward. And then we had a discussion on meaningful engagement and what exactly does that mean, defining that, having requirements around that, and how that's a barrier to question number 2 of getting the kind of information to people, having meaningful discussions.
Yeah, so we were the we were talking about decision makers and key sectors identified by the climate plan. So we laid out a couple different sectors this would focus on. So this would be industries, utilities, farmers, foresters, fishers, corporations, small businesses, economic development, that big umbrella outside of the agencies implementing the climate plan. So what we spoke a lot to was the business case for climate action, and also how there's an inherent gap sometimes between what communities value and how equity is trying to be addressed. So one of the values was expressed is in having tools that it better bridge that divide that we have. So thinking through what are those barriers that keep equity from being easier to attain. Point those phrases around just systemic inequities that face. And when we think of action, it might look different. Action is even it is disadvantageous. So what are those levels of action needed to really impact communities and ensuring that we're sharing narratives between what people want on the ground and what's actually being implemented, and we have some iteration in that process.
All right, thank you. So in the next little transition, we're going to do a little bit of a brainstorm activity. So a little different, although we will have another discussion. But hopefully that was a useful conversation about audiences, and keep it in the back of your mind for this next part. So on everybody's table, you'll see some Post-it notes. Hopefully we've broken them up into enough places that everybody can use their own Post-it notes without being too awkward about it. There should be pens too, if you guys don't have access to a pen. But here's what we're gonna do. So we've put a list of topics that we've kind of culled from looking at other state and local resources and federal resources, from some of the materials in the climate action plan. And we've like boiled it down into a very small set of indicator topics. And we grouped them into 3 groups. It's almost absurdly oversimplified, but helping improve that is kind of what we're trying to do. So we've got exposure to hazards on this board, and that includes greenhouse gas pollution and land infrastructure. We've got inclusive economic transition on the middle board. That includes economic outcomes for folks and inclusive access to jobs, economic outcomes for people. And then we've got economics and well-being, and we've included housing access and related issues, health, and income equality. What we want to invite you to do, and it's really open-ended, you can kind of treat this however you want it. We're kind of treating the Post-it as like a vote, because like we said, we're trying to do a little bit of prioritization and linking together some of these topics. So we know these are all huge issues. Like I said, this is kind of a brainstorming exercise, but you can use your Post-its to write an indicator that you might want data on, or might be interested in having data on, or might find useful. You could write a story that you don't have data on, but maybe one that has data, maybe one that doesn't have data, or one that we know that the data is bad or biased or missing. It's very open-ended. So again, we want to try to attach stories and maybe indicators, the most important stories, to specific topics. And later we'll try to come up with some cross-cutting ideas about those stories and link them back to the audiences. But we do just want to spend a few minutes now. You know, everybody, you can talk to your buddy, or you can just write on your Post-it notes in silence. Treat it how you want it. Yes, please go ahead.
Can you give me an example of how this would work? So if I have exposure to hazards as a team, my job with the sticky note is to write my experience with exposure to hazards.
It could be.
What can I get, like, can you ask me a question that I can answer on my sticky? Like, what would be a helpful question to answer?
If you know that there is an acute issue in a community, the differential exposure to hazards, especially if data could be helpful, or, you know, as we've talked about, maybe some of the data is not as helpful as it should be. Either of those is useful information.
So if I have exposure to hazards, and then I say, living next to a refinery are exposed to poisonous air and greenhouse gases, and same thing. That's what I would put on the sticky.
That works. Yeah.
Or I could put weight of chocolate asphalt.
Right, and yeah, just to give a kind of preview, like, what's the story there? There's more exposure, it produces the outcome. It's, yeah, so in the discussion, we'll kind of try to look things together. Those are great examples.
Just one note or several.
As many as you can do. We're just going to spend a few minutes on this, so I think time is your main constraint. Feel free to walk around. Yeah. Yeah. So we're back in the same places. What we love if you guys do is you can pick whichever food you want to talk about. Whichever one you feel like you're most interested in, have the most insight on. Most curious.
We have, different buckets. Under exposure to having, we actually have a lot of ideas in this category, but we're supposed to write down. So feel free to think good outside of this. But one of them is around land and infrastructure. The other is around greenhouse gases and reduction. So anyone put a sticky on here, I'm gonna talk a little bit about either surety or consider you. Let's start with the Jason.
I mean, I'll chime in, because I put in a couple. We developed maps, greenhouse gas emissions for the state of Louisiana for 1970 to present, 2015, 2018. We've got a pre-print up on the website that an additional source of funding to put all the data online. So that is something. So we've done that. There's also, we use the European data set for that. There's also like on greenhouse gas emissions for the state, like database, as well as data out there. So there are data sets that we have. Some of that's already up on the web. Some more is coming. And some of it's already.
So Alex, I'm here for a bit under this topic, just that concrete quantitative data on GHGs.
Yeah. Yeah, so quantitative data, and I think that there are a lot of data that come out from that of like, where are greenhouse gas emissions? Where are, so our greenhouse gas emissions in this state largely come from one corridor between Baton Rouge and that goes, there's kind of an interesting story there at the end of Baton Rouge, in part because at the end of the food draft channel in Mississippi, there is a legend that Governor long, built a bridge to prevent the boats from going north from that road. I don't know whether that is actually true or not, because the bridge was built after it's done. But nonetheless, that is the end of the new track channel. And all of our most of our data was north of there, so I don't know whether how long did it but it's just north, but it connects, but it connects, the facility connects, there's a bunch of terminals are just south of that. So the Exxon is there, so there's some great stories there, and then another chunk of are Lake Charles, right? Lake Charles, Parish is actually the largest in the state. That are there. Our single largest emitting parish, so the single largest region is the industrial port, but that's, a bunch of parishes.
So that's a great one. Which is certainly directly tied to our meeting our mission. What other indicators do we think of in terms of exposure?
Also, thing that shows state tries to create a
And that's what the statements is all about. You see it.
Did you have training for a large number of sites? It doesn't mean you didn't have a job.
Well, I don't know.
You didn't actually deny the.
Yeah, I want to see it.
They don't believe what exactly indicator. Give a data point. No, my kids are a baseline of. You're just gonna have to fail twice before you get it. You're gonna have to. That's what they'll say.
Everyone, 2 more minutes. Right, so what are the other types? What are some of the other metrics that are also yeah, One more minute. Other factors like All right, let's get to this side.
The polluted water.
Okay, so like last year, we did this one, right? And one of the things I was curious about is, well, how just really is that this job getting taken much bigger than it's going to because you're not required to get. But like any of this.
So what is being done to actually? This is not something you can really act like where house. They don't didn't actually replace the one thing that I put was it's actually trying to actually.
All right, let's try to wrap up the
It's like
discussion.
more street capture.
What were the strategies that they have someone with water?
Exposure.
Did they do or actually there was a chapter that's not good things are back.
Say, I feel like they wait my house.
They look at it, sounds like I rather have one. How do we manage those?
That is, that's not a natural.
I don't know, wastewater
Or cradles.
They didn't build slabs, but something that would go down.
Right.
They fill it in.
And then you fill them in.
There's some ideas around here with with access to efficiency and weatherization, with urban organization that's proximate to a school, it's for a church, or a hospital, like a 1 mile radius. That's
And as a value, as a
You win.
Just to follow up, we are developing better satellite data, you know, the world is developing better satellite data of air pollution. Connecting satellite, with other satellite metrics of air pollution. And so I think, lots of data is not better than that. Is another,
All right, everybody. We do want to be mindful of time, so we're just gonna spend a couple of minutes just reporting back and then just kind of wrap up. I'm happy to hang out for a while if anybody wants to talk. Maybe you guys are sick of hearing me, that's fine. Okay, so we have the economic outcomes. This is kind of the just transition, inclusive access to jobs. I think one of the big stories that emerged was the transition between the existing industrial base, especially in parishes that maybe don't have a very diverse economy. And there's a lot of fear around the spillover effects around that, but also fear recognition of the opportunities. We had a lot of mention of training, some questions about the longevity of jobs, especially given expectations about automation and how that might affect things. And something that was a recurring theme is the question that always comes up: how many people from Louisiana are actually getting the jobs? So there were a lot of good ideas here. So I think we'll go for these questions. Yes, Lindsay, would you like to?
Sure, so we have the category on exposure to hazards, and I was broken right here into two separate topics. So one of those was around GHG pollution, the other one was around land and infrastructure. So around GHG pollution, an obvious indicator and stories that were shared is around this accurate data and frequency of data that's updated around gases themselves and other pollutants too. So we need that, the continuous source of data so that we can track the rate of GHG. We also spoke to some narratives around impacts of the GHG on people that we can track as well. As was mentioned in the example, we can speak to asthma and cancer rates that can be correlated frequently with the pollutions that we find in the area. And we saw some of that similar over in the land and infrastructure link. So we saw that need for quantitative data and then more qualitative as well. So on the quantitative side, we can be looking at the rate of access to housing, especially around efficiency, weatherization, which reduces your energy burden. Also air pollution, measuring air pollution within 1 mile of school or church or areas where people spend a lot of time can also be a really good indicator of how GHGs can impact the communities. And there were also even on how much affect the land that we have, and we can measure the impact of pollution on our waterways and on. So a lot of really good ideas here.
Next, we have other topics, and we got into a long conversation on one sticky that started off saying volunteer emergency personnel trainings, and that led us to a conversation on having data points on state and federal trainings offered to communities and data indicator points on what time is a training, who was actually reached, and getting that data, which also leads to our conversation on education, which is related to a lot of the indicators already talked about on how far you went from the place to school, the money for schools, just very specific data points on community-based topics is what a lot of the misleading and unreported data seems to be focused on. All right, and then we had the economics and well-being section. So health and housing access, I think that's income inequality stuff as well. I would say that we had some really strong stories emerge out of this, more so stories that especially around housing. A lot of different stories to be told about these. These are, I guess, our more type data points, since our stories are specific way to out-migration, affordability of insurance, and passion in that market, mental health, the connection between access to health services and then there's health outcomes. There's also a really good piece about kind of a story of data being there, research being there, the facts being there, even the legislation being there, that there being this political will or this kind of like almost like a race of this sustained community engagement that is evidence of desire for change.
Okay, well, we're at time, everybody. I think we could have stayed for like another couple hours, but like what in the next few days, we're going to send out a survey. So if you felt like you didn't get to communicate something, that'll be another opportunity. And we'll look to pick up the conversation again in January after we have a chance to go and do some more work and present something a little bit more full.
Yeah.
Oh. You gotta go home. Everybody, last day for a little, everybody, so make sure you, if you haven't already, thank you, everybody, thank you. This is what it's supposed to feel like. It's supposed to be a little messy, it's supposed to be a little crazy, it's supposed to do different things, you're supposed to ask questions. This is what democracy is. This is what it's supposed to be. So I just want to say thank you for your time and your energy. I want to encourage all of us to continue engaging with this conversation. Again, we'll have another meeting to put all this together and look at the summary in January or February. So you'll get an email, you're on the list now. You signed up, we've got you, stay involved, stay engaged, your community, and I stay engaged. Also, this is just one piece of a bigger plan being implemented. So it's time for all of us to do the work to really pay attention to what's going on at our state level. We really need that. I think we have a form to take the minutes. We do? Great. All the advisory group members in the house, okay, we have a motion. Second by Steve, and all in favor? All any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, great. We passed minutes. Thanks, everybody. That was great. See, look at that democracy. And then are there any comments that need to be made? Remember, this whole day was public comment. Your stickies, your voice, that was what this was today. But are there any public comments that we need to take on? And ask yourself why you're talking before you. I said it, I showed it, that yes, ma'am.
Is there a way for us to connect with each other? Or is it not really like easily?
Not yet. Would you like to be in charge of helping?
Okay, Lauren, can you give her grace behind you with the mask, and let's go ahead and get this party started?
Sure.
So let's call organizing, goes with democracy hand in hand. Thank you very much. And we'll work with Lindsay's crew to see, we don't want to just take people's stuff, they didn't sign up to be engaged, but we will allow people to opt in to a process that we can continue. Ashe? All right, anything else? Ashe, y'all got you. Bringing it, we're bringing it in. Okay, any other comments? Yeah? Well, I want to just thank the governor's office again for always doing such a great job, and my thanks to the data center. Y'all are clearly working. Keep it going. Thank you very much, and thanks to all of you. We're officially adjourned. The meeting is complete.
A plus plus.